Patient registration. By watching this video, you will learn to define terms that are commonly used during patient registration and ask patients for personal information using suitable expressions. Let's start by defining patient registration as the act of making an official record of a patient's personal details that are relevant to his or her hospital visit. Usually, record forms have to be completed during patient registration. Here's a basic version of a patient record form. Let's discuss the terms in it, beginning with surname. Surname is also known as last name or family name. Surname is typically used in the UK, while last name is more common in the US. Not shown on this form is middle name, which comes between the patient's first name and surname. The first letter of the patient's middle name is his or her middle initial. For gender, we traditionally write male or female. Occupation refers to the patient's job. Then, we have DOB, which stands for date of birth. For DOB, we include the patient's birth month, day, and year. Next is place of birth. We can write it down as town or city, plus state or province, if a patient was born in the same country where the hospital is located. For example, Chicago, Illinois. On the other hand, for a patient born in another country, we can indicate city, state, or province, plus country. For instance, Tokyo, Japan. As for marital status, entries include single, married, divorced, separated, and widowed. Then, we have next of kin. This means the patient's closest relative. For contact number, we normally ask patients to provide not just their own number, but also those of their next of kin and some other people, whom we will identify later in this video. Contact numbers include home, work, and cell phone numbers. We may ask patients about their smoking and alcohol intake as well. Intake is the amount of something that a patient eats, drinks, takes, etc., in a certain period of time. Examples of entries for smoking and alcohol intake are 1 pack a day, 2 glasses of wine daily, or NA, which stands for not applicable. We write down NA if the patient does not smoke or drink. Also, we normally ask about any allergies that a patient has. Allergies are medical conditions in which the patient becomes ill, or develops skin or breathing problems, because he or she has eaten certain foods or touched particular substances, such as wheat, peanuts, pollen, or fur. The last term we'll discuss on this basic form is family medical history, which refers to diseases and health conditions that have affected the patient's family, especially his or her parents, siblings, and children, if any. When discussing family medical history, the patient's grandparents, aunts, and uncles may also be taken into consideration. Family medical history is also known as family health history, or simply family history. There are many other terms on actual patient record forms. These include the patient's address, for which we usually write down the street address, plus city or town, plus state or province or region, plus zip or postal code. We may have to indicate the country in certain cases too. It is also common to ask for the patient's email address. Another term is spouse, which means the patient's husband or wife. Married patients may say that their spouse is their emergency contact or the first person that the hospital will communicate with if they have an accident or sudden illness that requires immediate medical care. Next to the term emergency contact, we normally see relationship to patient, or just relationship. This refers to the way in which the emergency contact is connected with the patient. Aside from spouse, possible entries here include partner, father, daughter, sibling, cousin, and so on. Social Security number is a unique number given by the government to the patient. The patient uses this number to get a job, pay taxes, claim benefits, apply for loans, and other purposes. Employer is the person, company, or organization that the patient works for. For employment status, possible entries include full-time employed, part-time employed, self-employed, unemployed, retired, and student. Insurance provider, or insurance carrier, is the company that agrees to pay part or all of the patient's medical bills. The patient's insurance ID number is a unique number that allows healthcare staff to check the medical treatments and services the patient's insurance provider agrees to pay for. This number is typically found on the front of the patient's insurance ID card. During registration, we commonly ask the patient about his or her own medical history or personal history. That is, the medical problems and treatments that he or she has had before. We may inquire about his or her primary care physician or general practitioner as well. Both terms refer to the main doctor responsible for the patient's routine checkup or non-emergency medical care. Primary care physician is the term normally used in the US, while general practitioner is more common in the UK. Now, let's listen to a dialogue between a patient and a nurse during patient registration. We'll see the personal information provided by the patient, as written down by the nurse on our basic patient record form.
Henry, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
So, what happened to you?
I was working on a roof. It was raining hard, and I slipped and fell.
Did you hit your head?
Yes, I saw stars and felt sick at first. But it's okay now.
I see. It's possible that you have a concussion. First, I'll fill in this form with your details. What's your surname?
It's Akintola.
Can you spell that for me?
A-K-I-N-T-O-L-A.
What's your occupation?
I'm a carpenter.
Right. And your date of birth?
May 16, 1987.
1987. Where were you born?
Lagos, Nigeria.
What's your marital status?
Sorry?
Are you single or married?
Oh, I'm single.
And do you have a contact number for your next of kin?
Yes, my brother Samuel's. It's 484-291-8073.
Do you smoke?
Yes.
How many cigarettes do you smoke a day?
Around 10.
I see. Do you drink?
No.
Okay. Are you allergic to anything?
No.
Now, family history. Do any of your family suffer from the following? Diabetes?
Well, my father's parents are both diabetic.
Paternal grandparents? Hypertension?
No.
Heart disease?
No.
Let's take a closer look at the various questions that the nurse asked the patient in the dialogue, along with some alternative questions. Here are useful questions about the patient's reason for visiting the hospital. So, what happened to you? Can you tell me what happened? What seems to be the problem? To inquire about specific personal details, we can ask questions that begin with what, where, when, whom, whose, which, why, or how. Here are some examples. What's your surname? Where were you born? Whom should we call in case of emergency? How are you related to Mr. Johnson? Right after a what question, we can use "and your" to ask about other specific details without sounding repetitive. Here's an example. What's your address? And your home phone number? Moreover, we can ask yes or no questions for the same purpose. For instance, are you single or married? Do you have a contact number for your next of kin? Next, let's look at some useful questions about the patient's substance intake. Do you smoke? Do you drink? How many do you? How much do you? Regarding allergies, you can ask the patient, do you have any allergies? Do you suffer from any allergies? Are you allergic to? Have you ever had an allergic reaction to? Then, for medical history, you can ask, have you ever had, or have you ever been treated for? If there is a list of diseases, conditions, or treatments on the form, we can start with just one complete question, then mention each disease, condition, or treatment one by one. For example, do you have, or have you ever had any of the following? Anemia? Asthma? Cancer? Epilepsy? Lung disease? Of course, we wait for the patient's response to each item before we mention a new one. Now, questions about family medical history are similar to those about the patient's own history. Do any of your family have? Do any of your family suffer from? Have any of your family ever been treated for? Again, if there is a list of diseases, conditions, or treatments to ask about, we can start by asking just one complete question, then mention each item on the list one by one. We also wait for the patient's response to each item before we mention another. For example, do any of your family suffer from the following? Arthritis? High cholesterol? Liver disease? Tuberculosis? The nurse in the dialogue not only asked questions, but also used expressions with different functions. First among those are tag questions, which are useful for confirming information or asking for the patient's agreement. Take a look at some examples. Melissa, isn't it? Your brother lives in another city. Doesn't he? You don't suffer from insomnia, do you? Other expressions for confirming information or asking for agreement include, right? Is that correct? Did I get that right? Did I understand you correctly? Then, to show that we understand what the patient has said, we can respond with, right. All right. I understand. I see. Okay. If we want to ask a patient to repeat something, we can say, "Excuse me? Pardon? Can you repeat that, please? Could you please say that again? Sorry, I didn't catch that." We can say any of the following to ask a patient to spell something. Can you spell that for me? Could you please spell that out? Can you spell your spouse's first name, please? Finally, we can use expressions like next, now, and moving on to start a new topic. For instance, next, what's your date of birth? Now, medical history. Moving on, do you have any allergies? Summary. First, here are some terms commonly used during patient registration. Second, during patient registration, we may need to ask a patient about various relevant topics, including the following. Last but not least, below are other expressions that may be useful during patient registration. Let's take a 4-part quiz to check your understanding. You will see the correct answers toward the end of the video. Part 1. Match the terms in the left column with their meanings in the right column. Part 2. Fill in the blanks with the correct terms from the box. Part 3. Put the following terms in the correct columns in the table. Part 4. Choose the correct answer. 1. 2. 3. 4. 5. 6. 'Good job on completing the quiz. Here are the correct answers.